sitting here and I am just so happy right now. I feel like my heart is exceptionally full when I realized that we were coming up on episode 200 of the Healthy Parenting Connector series. I couldn't even believe it. I actually thought that I had been doing this series for 3 years, and it turned out it was 5 years. I have no idea how 2 years of interviews and episodes just sort of like dissipated in my head. But I think it's kind of this idea of like, when you're doing something you love, time flies, right? Time flies when you're having fun. And that for me is what the Healthy Parenting Connector series has been, is it's so fun. My favorite part of most of my weeks of work tasks are when I get to do these interviews, when I get to talk to really smart people. And I had decided maybe 6 weeks ago that I wanted to do episode 200 as like sort of a look back. And I couldn't deter, like I couldn't just like finalize the decision on whether it should be the top 10 parenting tips or the most impactful for my personal family, or I couldn't decide on the theme. And I put it off and put it off and put it off, which was silly because I've now spent 2 hours over the last few days pulling all the best clips. And we're going to have an episode 200 and episode 200B or something, because I'm going to have to do the best of the first 100 episodes and then the best of the second 100 episodes, because that's why my heart's so full. Oh my goodness. It's otherworldly. It is unbelievable to me that I have interviewed and hung out with, rubbed shoulders virtually with so many wise, intelligent, experienced, like just sages, incredible people in the fields of health and wellness, in the fields of parenting, in the fields of brain science and mental health. And oh my goodness, it was really, really hard to narrow these down. But what I would like to do is share what I think are the best. And usually I chose these because I still remember bits, because I'm still teaching or still living in my family something from this interview. And I'm telling you what, they're all worth re-watching, re-listening to. And that's also very exciting because I am going to announce at the end of this episode what is coming next in 2024. And that's a whole new thing and a little bit of an old thing. It's exciting. It's good. Do not worry. Let's jump right in because I have some fun stuff to share with you. The first clip I want to share is from episode 5, and this was an in-person interview I did with sort of a random chef in my local area. He demonstrated we talked for a while, but then he demonstrated how to make margarita pizza. And that recipe has changed my family's life because we make it all the time, and it's our favorite recipe in my son's book, Chef Junior. Here's a quick clip.
What are we making here?
We're gonna make a margarita pizza and roll it just like how you saw it.
Those are fresh farmers market tomatoes. That's it. Just the 2 things. That's burning my face off. Oh my goodness. Why the basil on last and not before you cook it?
It'll wilt so quick. When it's fresh like this, I like to do it just torn over the top.
Pretty.
Okay. It's incredible to think how a random encounter, a pitch that came to me, has impacted like so many dinners in the Kimball family life.
Spread it evenly, make sure you get everywhere.
You remember that?
I'm gonna add my cheese on just my part. Watch Paul's magnificent skills. Ooh, look at that yumminess.
Clip 2 is from episode 18. My dear friend, Dr. Elisa Song, she is one of our rare 2-time guests on the Healthy Parenting Connector. We did a whole episode about poo, and I still talk to my kids about whether they have brown bananas.
So we're aiming for soft brown banana. Just think soft brown banana. Okay.
And that's what we use at our house too. Like if one of my kids maybe takes too long in the bathroom, I'm like, did you have a book in there? Is the first, that's the first question.
Yeah.
And then like, you got brown bananas or something else going on, right? That's always my question too.
That's right. That's right. And you want to ask about wiping and frequency. You know, the frequency can really vary, but ideally it's going to be once or twice a day. You know, at the very least every other day, as long as it continues to stay nice and soft and well formed.
The rest of that episode is about gut health. If you have any concerns about your kid's digestion, highly worth a listen. Dr. Song is an integrative MD, so she's got the whole package. Our next clip is from episode 20, where I got to interview Olympic gold medalist Shannon Miller. And she and I talked about parenting, we talked about health and nutrition, and she told me a little routine that she and her family do that I just sort of shifted a little bit into what we now call the 3 Ls, and it has been a very consistent part of our own family dinner conversation.
What are the things you want to do today? And so things we kind of talk about, it's actually 3 things, is we really talk often about the importance of 3 things each day. One is to laugh. Now, you should laugh every day. And the second is to learn something new. I mean, especially children, but adults too. We should be able to learn something new each and every day. And so I love when they come home from school and they ask me what I learned today, and I have to be ready to tell them. And then the third thing is to say something kind to someone else. I think every day we can find someone that needs a kind word, or if they don't even have to need it, just say something kind to someone else. And you never know, as an adult or as a child, when you're talking with someone, that in that moment, they just needed that pick me up. They just needed to hear something kind. It might give them hope. It might help them keep moving forward or try a little bit harder, whatever that is. So those are 3 things that we talk about as far as goals for the day.
Another consistent routine that unfortunately we've now fallen out of, but was quite consistent when my youngest Gabe was much younger than he is now. He just turned 9. When he was like 5 and 6, he would be the one who would remind our family at the beginning of a meal to wake up your shoulders and just do this movement, opening the shoulders and pressing the shoulder blades together. And I learned that from Margie Bissinger in this whole episode on posture.
So this exercise, you can keep your arms, whatever position that's comfortable. And all you are doing, this is so easy, is bringing your shoulders back and down. So the muscles are working. So it's just so it's not like it's not arms. It's just the shoulder blades going back and down. Great. Good. Stand up. We want to keep the neck really relaxed. So it's just back and down. And then you could just hold it for a few seconds. But it's waking this muscle up. It's like, hey, because what happens is when we're like this all day long, it's overstretched, it becomes weak, and we don't even know how to use these muscles. And they're so important. So by just throughout the day, like, hey, just waking them up.
Episode 25 is a pivot moment for me. It really was one of the first times, maybe the first time, that I was exposed to the idea of food neutrality and body positivity. Now, I have to say, I am still not on board with either of those things fully, but I see the good in them. I see the good intentions in them. I think the pendulum has swung a little bit too far now, but back 5 years ago when I first interviewed Heidi Schaster, we had a really, really good conversation. So I'm still still striving to not talk negatively about my body in front of my kids. I believe that's very, very important. And that was something that I took from this interview. And we talked a lot, Heidi Schaster and I, about mindful eating. And I still teach people about how to help kids listen to their bodies. I still teach about avoiding full restriction of foods and that mindful eating. And so this, for me, is like a huge, huge turning point. And I can almost quote the section that I'm going to share with you.
I read in your book that you talk to groups of parents and say, I will tell you how to make your child into a binge eater. And all the parents get their pencils out and they're like, okay, I'm ready to write this down so I can't do it. And then you just tell them, restrict a food. Tell them a food is off limits. And that causes the reverse to happen in their brain and they become binge eaters. And I'm like, oh gosh, because that's always kind of been my husband and I talk about our own fear, I guess, or worry, if we restrict too much, is the pendulum going to bash toward the other side as soon as they leave the house or as soon as they leave, completely leave our house as young adults? And that is always our fear. So we, in our house, we have a 1 dessert a day rule. And that's more restrictive probably than you have. It's less restrictive than some people. I'll read about people who, oh, my child never has sugar. And I'm like, oh gosh, maybe my child should never have sugar. Maybe I'm doing them a disservice. But anyway, parenting's hard. Parenting's really,
it's like the toughest job ever. But I think what you've done is you set a reasonable limit and then you stick with it. I actually don't think the limit itself is really all that important. Like whether you're a dessert once a week kind of family or you're a dessert every day kind of family,
I think like the key is that you have something that you can live with, that you like enforce it and don't get, you're not wishy-washy about it. But it's not rigid, so that if there's like a special evening and there's food associated with it, there's some flexibility. And that like as the child gets older and starts to ask more about, well, why do we have this rule? You have a respectful dialogue about it, and maybe even revise it potentially, because you're giving a little and they're giving a little. So I think that it's that communication, I think, that's so critical, and that can, that helps food just sort of take its place as like one of the things in a child's life, and one of the things in this, again, then this young adult's life that they take care of themselves with, but it doesn't get so charged.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy and powerful. And at a similar time, just a few episodes later, I interviewed Dina Rose, and this interview changed our family's dessert policy forever. I think I'd been doing like so on desserts, but the way Dina talked about just making sure desserts weren't the trophy at the end of the meal, which is something I still teach, absolutely made a difference. Here's the clip.
But most times the dessert was just another course. It was fruit. In my house, it was almost always fruit, but it could be cheese and crackers like the Europeans do, or it could be plain yogurt with a sprinkle of something on it or something like that. And the reason I did that was twofold. One is that I wanted her to learn that dessert doesn't have to be sweet, but it also enabled her to, I would always know that there was like a backup built in. So if she didn't eat a lot of dinner, sometimes she would just go to town on fruit at the end of dinner. And then I knew she'd eaten well. And sweets as a dessert only happened occasionally. And so that solves the problem of what happens if they're not eating enough dinner. But I also believe, and I think that what you're saying is a good thing about like eating dinner is not the gateway to dessert. So eating some broccoli does not offset the sugar in whatever the sweet dessert is. And so we should not tie things together. We shouldn't pair them together, especially, well, we don't want that emotional pairing. Oh, I ate my dinner. Now I get to have a big dessert. Like, that's not a great lesson.
After this interview, I nearly immediately changed our family's dessert policy to one dessert a day, but anytime you want. And my 4-year-old at the time immediately started eating dessert at breakfast every day for months. That's shifted, but I don't think our dessert policies really shifted. This was a huge turning point moment and an interview I still refer back to. I love reading and I have a lot of favorite books, but one of my favorites, and I'm so honored to have interviewed the author, is The Gift of Failure by Jessica Lahey. And still to this day, I teach parents, particularly parents of picky eaters, the power of the word yet. And I didn't even remember, but that came from this interview along with a lot of other gems on how we let our kids fail, how we must let our kids fail.
We say a lot that what we care about is the learning. But over and over and over again, when I talk to kids about what they perceive their parents care most about, they believe their parents care more about their academic achievement than the learning. And so we may say that what we care about is the learning, but that's not what they're hearing from us. And so one of the things that it's really important for us to do is to use words like yet. Schools across the country increasingly will have like yet up on a billboard in the classroom, or the teachers will wear a little pin that says yet, because yet is this incredible word about progress. Of course you can't do this yet. You just learned it. Or of course you can't do this yet. This is your first time trying out how to do it. Or, you're 10, or, all of these reasons that we can't do something yet are so important. Focusing more on the process than the end product is not only gets them to believe us when we say that what we care about is the learning more than, the end number that comes out of that assignment, the grade. It also helps them understand that we really do care more about the learning than we do about the end result, because that focusing on the process shows them, as opposed to just telling them, that what we care about is the learning.
Personally, I'm not perfect on sleep yet, but I do prioritize it for my kids. And I still, when I remember, Practice waking my kids up gently by turning on their light and opening their door 15 minutes before they need to get up. That came from episode 41.
I think it would really help. I know that's what my mom used to do, to switch on the lights in the hallway, switch on a small light in the bedroom, and kind of get you to get awake that way. And you will notice, when they are stirring, then it's a great time to go in and just, help them to get out of sleep gently. Because if you have an alarm clock, it's your cortisol stress hormone is like cranking up, which also means that it's going to have a crash again a couple of hours or half an hour later, which I wouldn't recommend. It's not nice. It's not nice for the body. It's not nice for us. So I prefer a gentle way of waking up.
Marianne Jacobson was my guest a couple episodes later in number 43. And again, she continued to teach me to help kids listen to their bodies, still a phrase I use today. And we had a great conversation about what moderation is and how that word is sometimes overused, which I think is still true today.
Well, I see moderation being used kind of as an excuse. So like someone will be like, their third bowl of ice cream, be like, everything in moderation, And
it is, isn't it? It drives me crazy. Everything in moderation gives me sugar.
The problem is, though, it's because we feel guilty about eating the ice cream that causes it. So it's not necessarily people's fault. One of the key aspects for eating moderately is giving yourself permission to eat all foods, because if we don't, then we may become preoccupied with, like how I used to be. I didn't know how to eat them. So, ice cream and I like sweets. So I just try to cut them out as long as I could. Then I would overeat them. But once I allowed them into my diet and thought about how does it make me feel? How much do I really want? I never asked myself, like, what is it that I want? We're afraid that if we eat what we want, it's going to be all, sugar and stuff. But once I allowed myself, then those foods became less of a big deal. The problem is that a parent might be like, okay, here's 2 cookies. That's moderation. But moderation is an outcome. It's not something you do. So if you're listening to Hunger and Fullness and you have regular structured meals, you're naturally going to probably eat in moderation. That doesn't mean that you're always, if you haven't had cookies in a super long time, you may want to eat more than 2, that kind of makes sense. Like if sometimes I haven't baked cookies in a long time, my kids, they'll have a lot and then the next time they'll have a little, so we have to consider that, it's not always about eating the same amount, especially with kids, because kids are growing and they can be going through a growth spurt and they eat a lot. So the key is really, listening to Hunger and Fullness. What we think is moderation for us may be different for them.
Yet another book on my stack of favorites. It's a metaphorical stack. I don't always know where my books are. Hopefully they're in my bookshelf where they belong. But another favorite book is Julie Lythcott-Haims' How to Raise an Adult. Julie is one of the most fantastic speakers ever. And again, I look back and I think, how did I get an hour with this woman? Oh my goodness, she's so brilliant. During our interview, she grabs her water bottle and she demonstrates that some college students are unable to even open the cap these days potentially because their parents have done so much for them and their bodies are just atrophying. So Julie has a great story. Honestly, it's hard to even recap the whole post, but she teaches a system where you can help your kids be more independent. Do it for them, do it with them, watch them do it, and then let them do it independently. That is a strategy that I think holds true throughout all time. And here's another favorite from Julie.
Well, but to get to what it is, because we use these funny terms, helicopter parent, snowplow parent, lawnmower parent, drone parent, tiger parent. There are 3 behaviors that fall under this umbrella.
Mm-hmm.
Overprotective, fiercely directive, meaning you have to tell your kid what to be and do with their life, and the concierge, which is the handler or the helper. And we do these things because we love our kids fiercely, because we're afraid of everything they might encounter in the world, and because our own egos need for us to have the right outcomes with our children. So our children have effectively become our pet. We're trying to make them best in breed at the dog show, or they're our trophy, evidence of our great parenting. And so this is our ego saying, I need to know if I'm a good enough person. I need to know if I'm a good enough parent today. And I can demonstrate that by showing you what I have achieved for my kid. In the long term, it deprives kids, because we're doing things for them that they must start to do for themselves. we're depriving them of developing agency, or its sort of sister concept, self-efficacy, which is that psychological sense that we all must have to be healthy and well humans, that, hey, I know that when I act, I can make things happen. When I make an action, there's an outcome. People who don't have agency have higher rates of anxiety and depression. So we are directly contributing to these really poor mental health rates that children and young adults across this country are experiencing. It's not the only cause, but it is correlated with those things. So that's why we have to stop. We're harming our kids.
Juliette Starrett of the Stand Up Kids organization is another massive name that I cannot believe I got to sit down with, except that we weren't sitting. She and her husband, Kelly, are huge on stand-up desks, mobility for adults, and they have a whole foundation, Stand Up Kids, about getting standing desks in schools. So we specifically talked about that. And here's a little bit about what happens when kids get to stand all day long.
The other thing that a standing classroom allows for is movement options, right? Like you can, if you're in a standing classroom and your teacher is like on board, like if you want to sit on the floor, sit on the floor. If you want to, have your foot up on the desk and work in this position, great. Like the goal is really to give kids agency, right? So you can stand if you want. If you're tired and need a stool, you can use a stool. If you want to sit and work on the floor and rest, that's great, because you're actually putting your joints through full range of motion. Like the goal is to give kids options and agency. And so, the teachers just love it. It feels 21st century. Like if you see a standing classroom and then see a sitting classroom, it actually makes you feel sad.
As Juliette said, the point isn't to stand still, it's to let our kids move. That interview is so incredible, especially if you've got a child who does seem to want to move and isn't able to at school. It would be a great one to share with the teacher about the importance of letting that motion happen for your child's best behavior in academics. Episode 49 features Melanie Potok, who is one of my favorite Instagram influencers. She is just such a wise teacher for mamas and papas, especially of young kids, babies who are in the sippy cup phase, whose mouths are still forming, who are introducing food to their kids for the first time. She's a speech and language pathologist, and let me tell you, this woman knows her stuff. She talks about making friends with carrots in this clip, which is still a phrase that I use today, along with so much of the rest of what Melanie teaches in all of my picky eating programming. Super grateful for this interview.
So it is about the branding for sure. But on the other hand, you have to be careful not to come across with too hard of a sell. Try this, you'll like it. That always makes me hesitant. I feel like I'm being sold a used car. Hey, you're going to love this car, If we try too hard, the kids will pick up on that right away. One of the best ways to show our love for a new food is to bring kids into the kitchen and really get them cooking. And if you feel like they can only spend a few minutes with you, then get them in the kitchen just helping to prep. Get the child safe knives, let them wash. They don't even have to peel the carrots, but they certainly could. And chop up the carrots for your dish. Now they're making friends with carrots. And then if you want to, if they can't stay in the kitchen because they want to run off and play, you can make the dish. But when you get to the table, the words I want you to use are, hey, you know what? Johnny chopped up these carrots for me today. It saved me so much time. He was a great helper in the kitchen. And I love the way he did it. Did you see he did it at a slant? That was really creative. Now the kids had some ownership in that dish, and he's also really proud of helping.
Speaking of picky eating, I was on a roll about 25 episodes later. In episode 74 and 75, I interviewed Dr. Kay Toomey. I see Dr. Kay as one of the foremost experts in America on picky eating, and actually she teaches internationally, so she may be the foremost expert in the world. Her interview was so good, it got so long that I split it into 2 different episodes, and I've never done that before or since. Pretty much everything Dr. K teaches is now what I am able to teach in my No More Picky Eating challenges, partly because she allowed me to come to her training that's usually just for therapists and people who are, trained and work one-on-one. But she saw what I was doing here with Kids Cook Real Food and the Healthy Parenting Connector, and she just wanted to help me gain more knowledge. So I'm ever grateful for Dr. K Toomey. And here is an interesting clip where I ate a little bit of humble pie because of what I was actively learning in the middle of the interview.
As long as we think about how we set up our meals,
what we serve them for meals, we as parents can actually help our children to the best of their physical and developmental abilities outgrow their picky eating.
This is very exciting, and I'm also slightly terrified because I've been teaching people how to raise more adventurous eaters and combat picky eating and the power struggles at the table. And some of the things that you have said are not true have totally come out of my mouth. So I am humble enough to change that presentation at this point. Sticking with that picky eating theme, I treasure time with my in real life friends, and Mary Vogt is one of those people. She identified 4 eating styles. It's kind of like love languages for food, and I just really appreciate everything Mary does. The clip I want to share is where she describes her intuitive eating style, which is the one that's most often labeled a picky eater. But I want you to listen really closely for why those kids might be seeming like they're changing their mind on the food they like. Fascinating.
The first one is the intuitive eater. And I always put this first because this is what people often call the picky eater. And this is my 5-year-old. They are slow, they're very emotional, and they need connection to people. So their eating is tied to emotions. If they're upset about anything, they won't eat. Like they really need to be in a good place. They need to be relaxed. They need to be happy to eat. They often have a hard time with breakfast. They're really slow to get going in the morning. So if you have one of those kids that's just a slow mover in the morning, can't eat breakfast, they're probably an intuitive eater.
I can literally hear some moms going, "Oh my gosh, that's my kid." Yeah, keep going.
And these are the kids that actually listen to their bodies really, really well.
That's a good thing.
So their favorite foods are going to come and go. So maybe for 3 days, they're eating butter covered in bread or bread covered in butter.
Sometimes it feels like the opposite.
And they just need that butter, what's in it. And then the next day you serve them the same thing and they will not touch it. And you're like, what? And they've just gotten their fill of it. Their body has what it needs. And they're ready to move on.
Be sure to catch the rest of that interview for the other 3 eating styles, because understanding how your kids eat can help you understand how best to serve them and help them enjoy the widest variety of foods without pushing against their nature. After this, we sort of switched to a stress theme. And you know what? It was 2020. It was during the pandemic when episodes 84 and 85 and 87 happened. And so first in 84, I talked to Dr. Heidi Hanna, who's my stress mastery professor. And I want to share with you where she defines what a highly sensitive child is. The rest of this interview talks about stress sensitivity and how highly sensitive kids can really react differently to the world. They throw a lot of tantrums when we don't understand how to handle their stress sensitivity well.
Usually, are they creative? Are they kind of more spiritual or intuitive seeming? Like they like to hang out with adults. Maybe they're thinking about things ahead of their time. And are they sensitive to loud noises, bright lights, smells, and other kind of sensory information? Those usually almost always. They're like, oh my gosh, yes. Oh my gosh, yes. Mm-hmm. Are they just the most amazing child because they're so passionate and so driven and perfect at everything they do in some ways, but then you can't figure out why they're melting down at other times? Oh my gosh, yes. So much of that is this stress sensitivity that's actually a real gift if we know how to nurture it. And I think parents play, as they do with everything, such a huge role, because if it stresses them out and they feel like they can't fix it, a highly sensitive child is going to pick that up even more than maybe the other kids in your family.
Because of what I learned from Dr. Heidi Hanna, first of all, I know a lot more about stress and stress mastery, and I teach that all the time to mostly adults, but sometimes about how to help your kids. And we have a number of other interviews on highly sensitive children because it is such an important topic. One of them where we got to touch a little bit on stress was episode 85 with Dr. Amy Apigian. She is a dear friend. She's another one of my 2-time guests that I invited back. And in this episode, we talked about secure attachments and early childhood trauma. And I think for all of us to understand how trauma works, we really need to know more than our books ever taught us in elementary school, high school, and college. And here's a little clip from Dr. Amy describing that.
First of all, I figured out how to heal, rewire my son who had, he had extensive childhood trauma up until age 4. But even a lot of people would think that, hey, you got him at age 4. He's still young. when he grows up, he's not going to remember the stuff that happened to him when he was young. And that's not how trauma works. Because it was how his nervous system got wired, it's all programmed into his body, whether or not he has conscious memory of it.
Yeah, that was back in 2020. And since then, trauma, little t and big T trauma, has really, really gotten big. And it makes me want to go back to all of these old episodes that I got to hear, I got to learn so like ahead of the curve on trauma. And one of those pieces is how it is wired into our bodies, right? Dr. Roseanne Kapana Hodge is another favorite friend, another 2-time guest on the Healthy Parenting Connector. And we talked about anxiety in episode 87. And I just want to share a few of her many, many helpful tips on helping kids manage their anxiety.
The average age of onset of an anxiety disorder is age 6.
Oh.
So it is dramatically on the increase with littles. People ask me all the time, like, what do I notice in these almost 30 years? And the biggest trend of every age is anxiety. I also have seen a boatload more of autism, and which all autistic kids tend to have anxiety, right? So, and people say, oh, are we getting better diagnosing? No.
Okay.
Not at all. I feel like we're not any better, if not worse, even though we talk about this. I think parents are getting better at identifying these issues and coming to schools and saying, my kid's anxious. So, it is an ever-growing problem. We know through a major, 2011 study that 54.2% of children in the US have a physical or a mental health problem. And that is unbelievable that 1 out of 2 kids. There has been unrealistic academic demands put onto kids. They're doing developmentally inappropriate work. So, just even 10 years ago, what I saw a 3rd grader doing, I now see 1st graders at expectation.
2 grades of separation.
2 grades. So like 1st graders are expected to write entire paragraphs. 10 years ago, that was an expectation for 3rd graders.
Okay. Wow.
We're pushing the limits on things that are not possible for all children in terms of writing and reading expectations and math. I mean, math is very developmentally based. And yes, some kids are advanced, but not most, like a small amount. So we're then on top of it, requiring them to sit all the time. Almost all schools have abandoned the second recess. I mean, how silly is that? Like now they do research about if you add 3 extra 30-minute exercise periods in a week, you don't look like you have ADHD anymore. Well, it's because kids are unfocused.
Now we stray a little bit in episode 88 into the preschool phase. And I have to say, I don't have preschoolers anymore. So I don't really continue to use Jean-Marie Paynel's advice. However, I do continue to use it because it's embedded into our Kids Cook Real Food e-course, what she teaches through the Montessori method. And I love this clip about watching for what kids need and then putting it down low. That is still how we organize our kitchen because I've still got kids who can't reach all the cupboards.
But I was in a home doing a consultation and it was a 3-year-old and a 9-month-old. And the 3-year-old, I swear to you, he probably asked for water about 15 to 20 times when we were there because we know toddlers, right? They'll take a sip and then go off and do something else and then they come back. And so my simple suggestion to the mother, and there was a water dispenser, was why don't you put a few cups down low so he can reach them? Oh my gosh, that changed everybody's world. Like the child was able to get water when he was thirsty and mom did not have to get up every 5 minutes to go give him a cup. So simple things like that, but it's just our awareness, right? It's our awareness of what they are asking for repeatedly and what you see them kind of always curious, always wanting to be involved. Try to just take the steps apart and give them a piece of it and make it as kind of, self-sufficient as possible.
The last 3 clips I'm going to share are a bit of a hodgepodge. We're going to traipse back through the picky eating sphere, talk a little bit about mindfulness in our parenting, and then back to trauma. And all 3 of these guests are just wonderful people, wise women, again, with so much to share. Tara Hunkin is the first, episode 92, and this was the first time that I was introduced to the idea of meat aversion as a, kind of a sign or symptom of picky eating, actually being a sign or symptom of something that is missing in your body, in this case, of poor digestion. Check it out.
And then there's things like in picky eating, we see kids that don't like meats at all. So if they don't want to eat any meat, it's often because or any other food that is, it's often because they don't feel good when they eat it. And they might not feel good just because their digestion isn't working properly. So these are all types of things that we want to look for in our kids as well. And even things like craving starchy foods, again, all those types of things, it can be because starchy foods and also things like cheese. So that mac and cheese that your kid loves so much, it might be because they're not breaking down the proteins in it, and they actually leak into the bloodstream and cause sort of like an opiate-like reaction. They call them glutamorphins and casomorphins, and they give them an instant sort of high, so to speak. And so it makes you feel good. That's comfort food, right?
Tara's entire interview is on digestion. And I don't know if you noticed about like the craving, like the mac and cheese. It's so related to picky eating. So that interview is incredible if you have a picky eater, or if you're curious if your kid is digesting, or if you are digesting your food well. Really, really scientific and really great. In episode 94, I got to host Suzanne Tucker of Generation Mindful. She is a fantastic parenting educator, and she talks a little bit in this clip about how our brains adapt to joy. And this little story she tells has so many implications for our parenting.
So our brain is endlessly adaptable, endlessly adaptable. So what happens is we actually adapt to not only the challenging things, but the good things. So if I hit a $5 bill outside of your door and you left today, you'd be like, $5 bill, I'm going to buy a coffee. And you would have this surge of dopamine. You'd be so excited. Tomorrow, if I did it again, you'd have another surge, a little less, but you'd still be psyched. 5 days of this. And guess what? You stop peaking. You're like, yeah, there's the $5 bill that's, on my front doorstep. And here's what's fascinating. Day 6, I don't put a $5 bill. You actually dip lower than your norm. And it's just a regular day, but you're bummed that the 5 wasn't there. You expected it. You adapted. So for all my rock star mamas and papas out there, you're adapting to your awesomeness. Okay. You're adapting, and your brain is wired for the fires. So all that shows up in your reality every day is fire, 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 because you're wired for this.
I hope you get to hear the rest of that episode as well. And finally, the last episode of the first 100 that I want to highlight is actually episode 100. I didn't even see 100 coming. I did nothing special for episode 100. Here we are in episode 200, looking back. In 100, I interviewed counselor Marcy Pusey. And if you have ever come to my Beyond Baking Cookies presentation, you have heard her name, because I've continued to teach you what she taught me for many, many years now. What's really interesting is that I had completely forgotten that her interview was actually all about trauma and how trauma is related to storytelling, actually how storytelling is related to trauma. But she describes in this clip how to open up where trauma is stuck in the brain.
Because it's an inner brain stuckness, that's what we have to tap into. And the way to do that is through expressive and creative arts. Opportunities for people, not even just children, to do free expression. So it's not cognitive, right? Maybe it's playing with clay, and I'm just playing. I'm not thinking about it. I'm not planning to build a house. No one told me to build a house. I'm just creating. You're actually doing an inner brain process that you don't even have to understand. It can be drawing, it can be writing, it can be beating drums, it can be movement of your body. So like free dance or free movement, anything where you're just expressing yourself without the cognition or someone telling you what to do, taps into that inner brain and begins to wrestle with and dislodge what's stuck in there.
What again I think is most important is that as trauma becomes more like in the news and in the media and being researched, that we understand what trauma is. It's not just a war, it's not just an earthquake, but it is defined by Marcy Pusey, and I think most people are really similar to this, most experts, as anything that threatens your life which includes your emotional sense of self, that's just as important, that makes you feel unsafe and that you are powerless to stop it. Anything that fits that description can lodge as trauma in your body, just like Dr. Amy Apigian was talking about. And Marcy Pusey and I, man, we talked about a car accident that I had had. She helped me figure out like how I can talk to my kids about that. It is truly an incredible interview. And that brings me to the good news. I hope that you just want to hear all those interviews, because I do. I want to watch all of them again. Like I said, I've spent 2 hours sort of going in and out of all 200, actually the first 100 episodes. So the great news is that I'm finally doing something that listeners have asked me to do for years and years. And I have had literally on my list for like 3.5 years. We are finally taking Healthy Parenting Connector episodes, the best of the best, and making them into a podcast so you can take me with you in your ear. It's no longer just a video series. We'll have it rebranded as the Healthy Parenting Handbook, which is a name I love equally, probably more than the Healthy Parenting Connector. So the Healthy Parenting Handbook podcast, that will launch in January of 2024. And it'll be a good mix of old, I don't want to say old, archived Healthy Parenting Connector episodes like the ones that I just spotlighted in this episode 200, about 75% of those, and then 25% new episodes, a little mix between new interviews that I want to do because it's my favorite part of my job, and solo episodes from me. So look out for the Healthy Parenting Handbook in January 2024. For episode 200 of the Healthy Parenting Connector, I'm Katie Kimball from Kids Cook Real Food, here on a mission to connect you, parents who really want to raise healthy, independent adults, with the experts who have the information you need. I am looking back with gratitude for all of those incredible, wise men and women who have taught me so many things, and I feel honored that I have been able to bring them to you through the Healthy Parenting Connector. I greatly look forward to launching the Healthy Parenting Handbook as well, and I will see you then.